Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you're tuned into the Foxworth Theory, and I'm your host, Eugenia Foxworth. And our very special guest today is Faulu Mtume, son of the late Grammy-winning producer, songwriter, and band leader, James Mtume.
Good evening, Eugenia. Thank you for having me back.
Okay, now I wanted to ask you a quick question. I know your father worked with Roberta Flack during the 70s and 80s, Donny Hathaway, Stephanie Mills, Phyllis Hyman, among others. Do you recall ever meeting these hit makers?
Absolutely, absolutely. Some of my earliest memories are from some of those sessions. My father was very inclusive with me and my sisters and brothers, meaning that he would take us wherever he was going. So as his career was taking off in that direction as a songwriter and producer, he would take me with him to the studio sometimes. I loved it because I had access to this food budget in New York, and I could just hang out and listen to music and eat whatever I desired. But when I was just laughing about this with my uncle the other day, one of the earliest memories I have, it was from the "You Know How to Love Me" session with Phyllis Hyman, and I remember just kind of opening the door, and it was like this party scene. They were all at the board. They were playing the mix of the record, and it was just festive, and everyone was in there like really celebratory. And I just remember my father saying, "Barry Manilow, eat your heart out." I had no idea what that meant. But later, what I understood was Barry Manilow was commissioned to produce the album. Clive Davis had hired him to deliver these big, ornate pop records that didn't happen. And it was that record that really kind of solidified her place in that dance world, in that dance record. But they didn't want to put that record out. They didn't believe in it. But it was, but absolutely, like how my father's experience was at his house, that's what he provided for us growing up as a result of what he did. My first job was working with him on the road, during the Juicy Fruit and You, Me, and He tours. And, here I'm 12 years old, touring across America with him, seeing the world.
What age was it that you realized that your father was this successful producer, songwriter, and band leader? How old were you?
I would have to say I was about 11 years old. And what I remember, it was the summer after Juicy Fruit had dropped. I was away from school. But when I came back, I was kind of like, in the gym orientation. I was just kind of messing around with my friends. Hey, what were the records this summer? Because I'd spent the summer in California with my mother's family. And everybody was like, yo, it's this new record, Juicy Fruit, and it's crazy. And, well, they didn't say crazy back then, but they were like, really excited about this record. And I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't want to say, yeah, that's my father's record, because he didn't have to, and so when it picked up, yeah, that's when I kind of knew, like, okay, things have changed.
So when did he launch his group?
Well, the Mtume band itself had launched around 78, 79 with their first album, Kiss This World Goodbye. And I remember those. We lived in Newark. But they were good albums, but they did not achieve the same kind of singular success that Juicy Fruit did at the time. Obviously, he had his hit records with other artists, but this was the first embarkment where his name was attached. It was his band, who was also obviously the recording band for those sessions. But now he's embarking as a name and face of this band.
I love it. Now, this is going to be a question where I know it's going to go, but I have to ask you. Your father composed music such as Native Son, which marked Oprah Winfrey's debut as an actress. What was that like for him?
That was probably one of the things he most looked forward to, again, in his list of things wanting to do, because the opportunities for Black composers in the film space was few and far between. I mean, obviously, you had great examples in regards to Curtis Mayfield, what he did for Superfly, or what Isaac Hayes had done for Shaft. But, even in Isaac Hayes' example, he wins an Oscar and then never gets an opportunity to do it again. So he was quite clear on, that we weren't really invited or welcomed in those kind of spaces. So when this opportunity came about, I mean, he took it on full steam, and he lived for challenges. And so for him to be able to be asked and to be able to execute a movie soundtrack, for the film and scoring, it was an awesome experience for it. Then that's what basically had led way for him to do later on New York Undercover.
Okay. Now, I wish I could talk to you forever. What?
Hey, I got time.
I'm going to have to call you in private and talk. My boyfriend's not jealous. So whoever you're with, I hope isn't jealous. Now, over the many years, artists have sampled your father's music.
Yes.
And especially the hip hop world. How did he react to that?
Interesting question. So in the inception of sampling, when it started to become a really popular technical form, he was vocal about this, that in the sense of, if you're going to sample music, the artist that you're sampling should be compensated accordingly. And this was a very, very hard subject for a young hip hop to digest. Now, you got to remember, I'm of the hip hop generation. So I'm kind of like on both sides of it, but it made perfect sense, because he would say, if I took your lyrics and put it on my music, that doesn't make it my song, it makes it ours. He said, so it has to happen in reverse. So because of that, he initiated that kind of debate of what is publishing and what is right and wrong. And as a result of it, that's why he was able to establish the deals that he did from the beginning when people chose to sample his recordings. A good thing about my father was that he understood the value of publishing very early on. And this is from his jazz albums, like his first recording in 72, Al Cable Line. So he controlled 100% of this. So he could say, hey, if you want to use my music, that's beautiful. But if you make $1, I got to make 50 cents. It's pretty cut and dry. It'll be almost as if we were in the studio together making this new composition. And that was very, very smart of him, because now, as you said, with all the samples that happened from a record like Juicy Fruit, we're now attached to all of these new compositions, all the derivative works. So my father hadn't worked since 98 after the end of New York Undercover. He didn't have to. He put himself in a really, really unique position in that sense. And what I found out later was the plan all along. It was always to be free. And music was just a vehicle to get to that destination.
Right. Now, you had mentioned New York Undercover a couple of times. Mm-hmm. What were his contributions that made that show stand out?
Okay. The contribution that he made that was probably most significant visually was in the pilot episode. Natalie's was just supposed to be a place where the officers would wind up at the end of the show, would have a drink, kind of recap. It was never meant to be a place where these performances was happening. He said, no, let's make this into a thing. We can bring in, older established artists and have them do their classic, bring in new artists, have them do classic materials, and we'll make this a segment of the show, which was great because you had a lot of the audience tuning in just to see who was going to be at Natalie's. And he produced each of those songs every week. The second thing was that the opportunity of what he had to do with creating that sonic backdrop and that score for each of the shows. He brought a very new sound to television, something that hadn't been heard before. And again, another place where Black composers weren't necessarily allowed. So for him, this was probably one of the things he was most proud of from his career. So I would say it would be the sound that he brought, but visually and sonically, making Natalie's a part of the show.
Okay. Now, I'm trying to rush along, which is not fitting my personality, but you worked with your dad. You've been saying this. So were you making sure that he was being compensated for his works? And what did you do? I mean, how did you do this as a young person?
Oh, absolutely. Well, yes, I've been working directly with my father for close to 10 years in the capacity as a director of his publishing catalog. So my responsibilities are reviewing the contracts, pursuing the syncs for when the songs are used in television or movies, the sample clearances, monitoring our performance rights, and all of those kind of issues where we're trying to make the catalog as robust as possible. Making sure that the songs are being used in respectful ways and respectful places, but also in as many places as possible because the music is to be shared. So I was very fortunate that he had allowed me to do that because he could hire anyone, but I don't know if he was trying to cut corners a little bit, save a few bucks. I don't know, but I think that he saw that this would be something generational for his bloodline, for his family. And that's what we're upholding. So we don't leave it in anyone else's hands because we're very confident to handle it on our own. And it's been very rewarding, not just monetarily, but in the sense that I have an opportunity to continue the legacy because Mtume started with him. So he took that name and he built that name and he built a very strong foundation and legacy for myself, my siblings, and our children to build and continue upwards. So it's a very unique opportunity.
So that's what you're doing to continue his legacy.
Absolutely.
Making sure it's preserved. Huh?
Absolutely. And in the integrity in which he would do it, because I'm very clear on what that is.
Yes, I'm sure. Believe me. Your father is sitting on your shoulder right now.
He's sitting on my shoulder, on my back, on my neck, and my head. He's everywhere. He's everywhere.
He's everywhere. Absolutely. Now, what advice would you have? Or would you not you? See, I got confused there because I'm thinking your fathers are there. I mean, you're so strong and, getting it out. What advice would James Mtume share with those who want to be in the music business?
Okay. Well, I'm going to try and speak specifically to those that would want to join the business in a similar fashion that he did as songwriters or producers. And this was something that was always very important to him, to share information with the generation behind, because he always believed that, wisdom not connected to the energy it's not going to work. So he said you needed to connect to the younger generation to show them what you have so that they can take the music further. The first thing he would always say to young songwriters is know your tempo. Understand, what is your place? What is your zone? Do you write up tempo? Are you better as a balladeer? And then he would have a thing where he said imitation, emulation, and innovation. So he said, as you start off, you're attracted to something and you tend to imitate it. Like for him, his early influences like Burt Bacharach or Curtis Mayfield. So he would do things to kind of imitate. So as you develop, the imitation moves on to emulation, whereas you're kind of starting to, find your space and or find things that you're doing and moving a little bit away from just kind of copying. He said, and then when you reach the place where you really need to be is when you're innovating. And now you've taken all these pieces and now it's coming through you in this way as your expression. And he said, always, to operate as what is your signature as well. You have to be unique. You have to have something that's identifiable in the space, because you have to push it to the innovative space if you're going to do it. And obviously do the work. Don't cut any corners on this music. You can't lie to it. You cannot lie to the music.
No. And what about you? What advice would you share with up and coming artists?
I would, in the younger generation, I would say, I would have to pick up where he left off is don't cut the corners, study the music, because we have with the technology, it allows us to have access to sounds, have access to pre-recorded music to kind of you don't need to be a musician to play music now because of technology. And that's just the nature of technology. But, he would say things very simply. He said, if you want to be a lawyer, you have to study what? The law. You want to be a doctor, you have to study what? Medicine. If you want to be a musician, study the music as well, because we don't want to get into a place where we become stagnant in what we have to offer. I mean, if you think about all of the truly American art music, it's all Black music. It's jazz, it's blues, rock and roll, and hip hop. This is all us. But what's happening now is we're not pushing anything. We've kind of plateaued. And so with the taking the music out of schools, if we're not, if church is the only place where people are learning how to play music, this is not by accident. And so what's going to happen is, and as he always said, the plan is to have Black music without Black faces or Black people. So what do we have? So if we're not if we're not pushing our own music and creativity forward, then we're going to be stuck here.
And I totally agree with you. Totally. Now, I have to ask you real quickly, how can everyone follow you on social media and keep up with your journey?
Well, I got to be very honest. I have been an analog guy. I'm antiquated. I don't have a social media, but we have jamesmtumeonline.com. That is the place where we can interface. We have an IG, but you know what? When my father deceased, they shut it down. So if anyone can help, and if anyone in the audience can help us out with that, that would be very helpful, because that was the way that we share the information for them. Because we do have, we have a lot of events coming up and a lot of things in design to continue the legacy. My father, do you mind if I mention some of them?
Yes, and then we will have to say, I will continue speaking to you at your time, and I do promise that. But you can mention someone, of course.
I would just like to mention one thing, because this was very, very important. So in August of this year, they're having the 50th anniversary of the National Black Political Convention in Newark, New Jersey. My father was a co-creator and a co-convener of this event with the mayor of Newark, Ras Baraka, and Mayor Lumumba out of Jackson, Mississippi. So they're still honoring him in this. And as part of the event, we're going to have a celebratory concert and a memorial for him on the 4th, and then at the end of the event on the 7th. So anyone in the New York, Philadelphia, Connecticut area, we would love it. It's going to be a great political event, but also this will be a place where we'll be able to kind of celebrate him publicly.
Well, thank you, Faulu.
Thank you.
I would like to say that you have widened my vision, and thank you for joining us today, and thank you, the viewers, for watching the Foxworth Theory. And you can see us on Thursday and on Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Eugenia, I thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to have a conversation, some time with you, and to talk about this man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.